on how to judge your brother correctly and incorrectly. Both of these men deal with the same person in their judgment. I'll be talking to you about Korah from the tribe of Levi and Jethro, priest of the Midianites and father-in-law to Moses. The title of this message is Judging Your Brother Correctly. Judging your brother correctly. I would like to start off with the wrong example on which to correct your brother. So who was Korah? Korah was the oldest son of Izhar. Izhar was the son of Kohath, who was from the tribe of Levi. So we see that Korah was from the tribe of Levi, the same tribe as Moses and Aaron. Korah was one of the princes of Israel. He wasn't a priest, however, ordained by God through Moses. But he felt that he had equal, if not more, authority over the congregation. Korah led a rebellion against Moses and Aaron, accusing them of exalting themselves above the congregation of the Lord. Korah was not alone in this charge. He was able to gather 250 princes of the assembly, men of renown, to challenge Moses' authority, saying, "You have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why do you set yourself above the Lord's assembly?" It is important to note that Korah wasn't just someone who wanted power. He had actually been part of the leadership of the congregation. The men who challenged Moses had also been leaders until God placed Moses over them. Perhaps they viewed Moses as someone who usurped authority from out of nowhere. It had been true that Moses had been gone for 40 years, but in their view, he came back and took what was theirs. Korah must have believed that God would side with him and the other princesses, or he would never have gone against Moses. Now let's go to our Bibles and we begin reading Numbers 16. Numbers 16. And I'll be reading from the New King James. Oh, this time, yes. I'll be reading from the New King James Version, but I will read from the Living Bible from time to time, and I will let you know when it is. This is from the Living Bible, verse 1, chapter 16. One day Korah, son of Izhar, grandson of Kohath, and descendant of Levi, conspired with Dathan, Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, all three from the tribe of Reuben, to incite a rebellion against Moses. 250 popular leaders, all members of the assembly, were involved. This is verse 3 in the Living Bible. They went to Moses and Aaron and said, "We have had enough of your presumption. You are no better than anyone else here. Everyone in Israel has been chosen by the Lord, and He is with all of us. What right do you have to put yourself forward claiming that we must obey you, and acting as though that you were greater than anyone else amongst the people of Israel?" Now in the New King James Version, and I'll read from verse 2. They rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said, "You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" So can you think what it must be like to have 250 men of well-renown amass at your front door and accuse you in front of the assembly? Would it make you pause, make you wonder if indeed you were right, if indeed Lord was with you? So what would you think and what would you do? This is what Moses did in verse 4. Verse 4, New King James Version of chapter 16. So when Moses heard it, he fell on his face. And he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is his and who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him. That one who he chooses, he will cause to come near him. Verse 6. Do this. Take censers, Korah and all your company. Put fire in them, and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Lord chooses is the Holy One. You take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi. Now Moses speaks directly to Korah. Verse 8. Then Moses said to Korah, hear now, sons of Levi. Is it a small thing to you that the God of Israel separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the work of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation and serve them? And that he had brought you near to himself, you and all your brethren, the sons of Levi, with you. Are you seeking the priesthood also? Verse 11. Therefore you and all your company are gathered today together against the Lord. And what is Aaron that you complain against him? And Moses said to call Dathan and Abiram and the sons of Elab, but they said, we will not come up. It is a small thing that you have brought us up out of the land of flowing with milk and honey, to kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us. Moreover, you have not brought us into the land flowing with milk and honey, and not given us inheritance of the fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. So after Moses spoke to Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, then he speaks or prays to God. He's hurt that these people have seen miracle after miracle, many performed directly through Moses and Aaron, including leaving Egypt with a high hand and parting the Red Sea, led by Moses and Aaron, but they still refuse to believe that God put Moses in charge. They want to reattain their full leadership roles that they had before Moses came back from the wilderness. Verse 15. Then Moses was very angry, and he said to the Lord, do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt any one of them. Then Moses said to Korah, tomorrow you and all your company be present before the Lord, you and they, as well as Aaron. Let each take his censer and put incense in it, and each of you bring his censer before the Lord, 250 censers, both you and Aaron, each with his censer. So every man took a censer, put fire in it, laid incense in it, and stood at the door of the tabernacle of meeting with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. I want to stop here because I'm a very visual person. I like to see, much less just read. Can you imagine what it felt like to be just two men with all these men around you, surrounded you? They all believed that they were correct. Obviously they were not. Don't you know, they thought that they were just as holy as Moses. We see in 1 Corinthians 10:12, therefore let him thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. So we're going to go back to verse 20 of chapter 16. Now God is speaking to the multitude and is very displeased with these men's actions. Verse 20, chapter 16. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I might consume them in a moment. Then they, Moses and Aaron, fell on their faces and said, O God, the God of spirits and flesh, shall one man sin and you be angry with all the congregation. Verse 23. Get away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Verse 25. Then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him, and spoke to the congregation, saying, Depart from the tents of these wicked men, touch nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. So they got away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of their tents with their wives, their sons, and their little children. Verse 28. And Moses said, By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done any of this of my own will. If these men die naturally like men, or if they're visited by a common fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. In other words, they will not die of old age, or run over by an out-of-control chariot. It will be something that has never been seen before. Verse 30. But if the Lord creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up, with all their belongings to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you will understand that these men have rejected the Lord. They didn't reject Moses. They rejected the Lord and who he picked. Now it came to pass, verse 31, as he finished speaking, all these words of the ground split up apart underneath them. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, all of their households, all the men with Korah, with all their goods. So those that went down alive in the pit, the earth closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. Then all of Israel were around them fled at their cry, for they said, Lest the earth swallow us up also. So why do you think the congregation would have said this? Lest the earth swallow up us also. Is it perhaps that they were in agreement with Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, but kept silent? I think so. They were not recognizing that God was leading them through Moses and Aaron. So we go to verse 35. And fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Tell Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, to pick up the censers out of the blaze, for the censers are holy, and scatter the fire up some distance away. The censers of these men who sin against their own souls, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering of the altar. Because they presented them before the Lord, they are holy, and they shall be a sign to the children of Israel. So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers, which those who were burned up had presented, and they were hammered out as a covering of the altar, to be a memorial of the children of Israel, that no outsider who is not a descendant of Aaron should come near to offer incense before the Lord, that he may not become like Korah and his companions, just as the Lord had said to him through Moses. So to me, it's obvious that Korah thought he could do a better job leading the people than Moses was doing. By leading this revolt against God's divinely appointed leader, Korah was actually revolting against God. Moses proposed a test to prove the source of his authority. Korah and his followers did not pass that test, and God opened up the earth to swallow up the rebels, their families, and all their possessions. Furthermore, fire came down from the Lord and consumed those 250 men who were a part of Korah's rebellion. The rest of the Israelites were terrified and fled, only to come back the very next day and accuse Moses and Aaron of killing the people of the Lord. We can clearly see how Korah, Dathan, and Abiram did not judge Moses correctly. They refused to see that God was with Moses. What do you suppose their motivation was? Was it self-serving? Was it motivated by a lust for power? Do you think they wanted to better serve the Israelites? they were clearly not interested in helping Moses to be a better leader. Did they view Moses as some has-been prince, returning from exile in the wilderness just to come back and assume authority that they once had over the people? Yes, Moses led them out of Egypt, but they still wanted their power back and stature for themselves. Besides, who is this Moses in comparison to themselves? We see in Numbers 12, verse 3, that it says, Moses was very humble, more than all the men who were on the face of the earth. I get the impression that when you read the scriptures, one can easily tell that Moses felt responsible to God to take care of what God had entrusted to him. Perhaps if Korah and the others had approached Moses in a different way, the way that we're about to see, that the outcome would have been a lot different. Now let's go back 2 books and see a good example of how to judge correctly. We see in Exodus that this man noticed that there were some problems on how things were being done. He studied it before saying anything and then offered his advice on how to fix the problems. His qualifying his advice to do it as God says, as we see in the Bible. This example of how to judge a brother is shown to us by Jethro, the father-in-law to Moses. We see in Exodus 18, Jethro gives Moses some correction. Or, as I say, he passed a judgment on Moses. Regardless of what you call it, Jethro saw that Moses needed to change his actions to make life much easier for himself and for all of Israel. We will be reading this whole chapter together. But before that, I would like to do just a little background on who Jethro was. Jethro was also called Reuel in Exodus 3. Reuel is a title. So Jethro is much a title like judge or sir or master or Pharaoh. It was not his name. Reuel was his name. Jethro was his title. But because the Bible refers to him more as Jethro than Reuel, we will continue to call him Jethro. So let's go to Exodus 18, and we will start in verse 1. Exodus 18, verse 1. And Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Verse 2. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back with her 2 sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom, for I have been a stranger in a foreign land, and the name of the other was Eliezer, for he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. And Jethro's, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Verse 6. Now he had said to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her. Verse 7. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other about their well-being, and then they went into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that he had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them on the way, and how the Lord, not Moses, how the Lord had delivered them. Then Jethro rejoiced for all the good which the Lord has done for Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know the Lord is greater than all other gods, for in the very thing in which they had behaved proudly, he was above them. Verse 12. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and offered sacrifice to offer to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. I would like to point out the relationship here between Moses and Jethro. It reminds me a little bit of the relationship with my own father-in-law, Ernie Von Holland. I call him Pop. When Pop comes down from Canada to visit every few years, I like showing him around the town and telling him of my accomplishments. Then we put on the fatted calf with my parents, and we eat and enjoy each other's company. There have been times when he thought I needed to rethink on how I was doing something, and I hope I have been as receptive with his coercion and correction and thoughts as Moses was to Jethro. I really appreciate my father-in-law as he continues to walk and stand with God. So we go back to the Bible, verse 13. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So, when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, notice how he says it, "What is this thing that you're doing for the people? Why do you alone sit and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?" And Moses, verse 15, said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. And when they have difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another. And I make known the statutes of God and His laws." Again, I want you to notice the tone of Jethro as he speaks to his son-in-law Moses. Verse 17. So Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing that you do is not good. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. For this thing is too much for you, and you are not able to perform it by yourself." Verse 19. "Listen now to my voice. I will give you counsel, and God be with you. Stand before God for the people, so that you may bring the difficulties to God. And you shall teach them the statutes and the laws, and show them the way in which they must walk, and the work they must do. Moreover," here's the instruction, "moreover, you shall select from all the people able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. And let them judge the people at all times, that it will be every great matter that they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. If you do this thing," verse 23, "and God so commands you," in other words, if God approves of my suggestion, "then you will be able to endure, and all these people also go to their place in peace." So Moses heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. And Moses chose able men of all of Israel and made them heads over the people. Verse 26. So they judged the people at all times. The hard cases they brought to Moses, but they judged every small case themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way to his own land. So brethren, what can we learn from Jethro? I have 5 points. This is a good example, so I'm spending a little more time on this. Point number 1. Study the matter before you act. Study the matter before you act. Jethro, he studied the matter before speaking. He didn't get part of what was going on and infer the rest. He was very wise to watch, quietly it appears, before speaking on the matter. It is important to research all parts of the problem before drawing conclusions about the situation. It is so easy to jump to conclusions with half-hearted research. Many a person has gotten himself in trouble by trying to figure it out with a partial knowledge, or listening to others who have never lied to me before. Another rumor. I cannot believe how many times I've heard people run full ahead with an assumption or a comment or a judgment from somebody who is reputable or someone in the know. All people make mistakes and sometimes can mishear and sometimes fully misunderstand what is going on. Many broken relationships and miscommunications can be traced back to someone that listened to gossip and made concrete statements, and they turned out to be completely false. Our own church history, dating back to Mr. Armstrong, is ripe with divisions and strife caused by careless statements or a letter or a comment from somebody who should know. So please, do research into the matter. Korah had convinced himself and the others that Moses had taken power from him and all the other princes of Israel. He believed that he had the right to be in power and did not consult God first. Point number 2. Talk to that person in private. Talk to that person in private. Jethro talked to Moses in his tent in private. Korah did not. He had the 250 men with him when he spoke to Moses. Did Jethro stand before the multitudes and announce that Moses had taken too much on himself? No, not at all. What an excellent example that we have on how to correct a brother. Korah, however, did, as we said before, taking the 250 men at his tent to talk to Moses. We see in Matthew 18, verse 15, "Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. But if he will not hear you, take with you 1 or 2 more. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, tell him that you are like a heathen and a tax collector." Galatians 6, verse 1. "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, such as one in the spirit of gentleness, consider yourself, lest you also be tempted." Jethro did this very thing. That was Galatians 6, verse 1. He most assuredly spoke to Moses in a spirit of gentleness. Korah, of course, as we saw, did not. Point number 3. Point number 3. Make sure that when you help your brother for the right reasons and not to prop yourself up. Make sure you help your brother for the right reasons and not to prop yourself up. Jethro came to his son-in-law out of concern for Moses and the whole congregation's well-being, not to find a way to appropriate power and prestige for himself. Jethro showed love and compassion for Moses, and his goal was to help him. Jethro could see how Moses was conducting business and how it was wearing him out and frustrating the congregation. Nowhere did Jethro even say or think, now that Moses has to select men to rule over God's people, he will pick me. After all, he was a priest of the Midianites, and he went home after the matter was settled. Number 4. Be sure that the advice or judgment that you give reflects what God would give. Be sure that the advice or judgment you give reflects what God would give. Jethro tells Moses to take his advice if, emphasize if God approves of it, then follow his advice. Verse 23. We all make decisions every day. Some are minor, like what to wear or what to eat for lunch. Others are very major, requiring much thought and prayer. Remember, big decisions require big prayer and a lot more time, as they require a thorough reflection and contemplation. Give the person you talk to time to reflect and to pray on this matter. Number 5. Allow the other person to make their own decision on the advice you gave. Allow the other person to make their own decision on the advice you gave. We cannot force others to make the decision that we believe is right for them. A watchman warns the city, but a watchman cannot force the residents to flee. Moses is an example of what to do when given advice. We saw earlier that Moses sought out God's view on both requests, as we should when faced with advice, even if it is not wanted or given in a gentle manner. In Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 23, Jeremiah 10:23 says, Lord, I know that people's lives are not their own. It is not for them to direct their steps. Verse 24, discipline me, Lord, but only in due measure, not in your anger, or you will reduce me to nothing. That was Jeremiah 10:23. Moses heard his father-in-law and heeded his words. He also heard and let God take care of things with Korah. We also see in James 1, verses 19 through 20, James 1, 19 through 20, so then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce righteousness of God. That was James 1, verses 19 through 20. I would like to read these words from Galatians 6, verses 1 through 5. And I want this to be in your mind when you yourself go to a brother or a sister that you think needs correction. Galatians 6, verse 1. Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness. Consider yourself, lest you also be tempted. Verse 2. Bear one another's burdens, as so to fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone, and not in another. Verse 5. For each one shall bear his own load. My dear brothers and sisters, know that we should watch over each other with love and understanding. We need to teach each other with respect as fellow heirs and brothers and sisters with Christ when we talk to each other, and that we follow the instructions given to us in Ephesians 4, verse 29. Ephesians 4:29, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. That was Ephesians 4, verse 29. Jethro approached Moses out of concern for him. Korah and his followers did not. Jethro showed the utmost respect for Moses and to God, advising Moses to make sure that God approved of what he was advising. Korah desired power, stature, and showed disdain for God's chosen servant, and in doing so, revolted against God's very wishes. So when you see a brother or a sister that needs correction, remember the excellent example of Jethro set for us to learn from, and also the lessons of Korah, and not to judge selfishly. So reflect on these 5 points, and I will read them to you again. The 5 points are: 1. Study the matter before you act. 2. Talk to the other person in private. 3. Make sure that you help your brother for the right reasons and not to prop yourself up. 4. Be sure that the advice or judgment that you give reflects what God would give. And 5. Allow the other person to make their own decision on the advice that you gave. Remember, we must help each other in love and work towards being what God wants us to be. We hear all the time how we are not to judge or even remark when a brother and sister is doing wrong. The Bible shows us very clearly that yes, it is okay to judge as long as you do it correctly.